In 1954, a French chateau sat empty on Newport's Bellevue Avenue. Rain leaked through the roof. Windows rattled in their frames. 60 rooms gathered dust behind locked doors. This mansion had cost $3 million to build 60 years earlier. Now you couldn't give it away. The problem wasn't the architecture. Richard Morris Hunt, America's greatest architect, had designed it. The problem wasn't the location. It stood on the most prestigious street in the wealthiest summer resort in America. The problem was what the building actually was. Belcourt wasn't really a house. It was a stable. The entire first floor, 30,000 square feet, had been designed for horses. 30 stalls with imported tile floors, heated quarters with custom ventilation, a carriage room that could accommodate a dozen vehicles, and directly above all of this, a ballroom where guests had once danced while hoofbeats echoed below them. No one knew what to do with such a place. Developers didn't want it. The design made conversion impossible. Other wealthy families wouldn't touch it. Who wanted to entertain in a building that smelled like a barn? What made the abandonment remarkable was who had walked away. Alva Vanderbilt Belmont, the woman who had once ruled American society with absolute authority, had lived here with her second husband. When he died, she left and never returned. She had conquered Newport, divorced a Vanderbilt, remarried in scandal, and fought for women's suffrage. But she couldn't make Belcourt work. By the 1950s, the mansion represented everything that had gone wrong with Gilded Age excess. It was too big, too expensive, too specialized, and too strange. It should have been demolished. Most people expected it would be. But someone saw possibility where others saw only problems. A middle-class couple from Rhode Island would purchase the mansion for a fraction of its value and spend the next 50 years saving it. Their story is as improbable as the building itself. To understand how Belcourt became the strangest mansion in Newport, we have to go back to the beginning. We have to meet the bachelor who loved horses more than people, and the architect who had to figure out how to make a stable look like a palace. If you love stories about America's most unusual estates and the fascinating people who built them, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Tell me in the comments which Newport mansion we should investigate next. The Breakers? Marble House? Rose Cliff? Your support makes these deep architectural investigations possible. Now, let's discover why one man built a palace for his horses. Chapter 1. The Bachelor and His Horses. Oliver Hazard Perry. Belmont was born into American aristocracy in 1858, the youngest son of August Belmont, a German-Jewish immigrant who had become one of the most powerful bankers in America. The Belmont name carried weight in financial circles. August served as the American representative for the Rothschild banking empire. He had married into the prominent Perry family, giving his children connections to American naval hero Oliver Hazard Perry. Young Oliver grew up surrounded by wealth, but not acceptance. His father's Jewish heritage remained a barrier in the rigidly Protestant world of New York's oldest families. The Belmonts could never fully belong to the inner circles that the Astors and Vanderbilts commanded. This exclusion shaped Oliver in ways he would spend his life trying to overcome. He attended Harvard, but did not distinguish himself academically. What captured his attention was not books or business, but horses. From his earliest years, Oliver exhibited an obsession with breeding, training, and racing thoroughbreds. While other wealthy young men collected art or pursued politics, Oliver spent his days in stables and his afternoons at racetracks. His father understood the passion. August Belmont had established himself in American racing circles, building stables that produced some of the finest horses in the country. The Belmont Stakes, one of racing's Triple Crown events, bore the family name. Oliver inherited this legacy along with a fortune estimated at several $1 million when his father died in 1890. At 32, Oliver found himself independently wealthy with no obligation to pursue conventional business. He could have managed investments from a Manhattan office like his brothers. Instead, he devoted himself entirely to his horses. He expanded the family's breeding operation. He traveled to Europe to purchase additional stock. He spent money lavishly on animals he considered superior specimens. This single-minded focus came at a social cost. Oliver remained unmarried well into his 30s, unusual for a man of his wealth and background. Society matrons attempted introductions. Young women angled for his attention. He remained uninterested. The horses provided companionship and purpose that human relationships apparently could not. By the late 1880s, Oliver had established himself as one of America's premier horse breeders and racing enthusiasts. He knew bloodlines the way some men knew stock portfolios. He could assess an animal's potential at a glance. His stables produced winners that enhanced his reputation beyond what his father's banking career had achieved. But he faced a practical problem. His Manhattan properties could not accommodate the scale of operation he envisioned. His Long Island estate provided space, but not the social setting that might help overcome the barriers his family background had created. He needed somewhere he could combine his passion for horses with an entry into the most exclusive circles of American society. Newport provided the answer. The Rhode Island resort had become summer headquarters for the nation's wealthiest families. Every August, millionaires abandoned their city homes and converged on this small coastal town to see and be seen. Competition ruled the summer season. Families built increasingly elaborate cottages to demonstrate their prosperity and taste. A presence in Newport announced that you had arrived among America's elite. Oliver owned property in Newport already, but nothing that matched his ambitions. He decided to build something entirely new, something that reflected his priorities in ways no other mansion had attempted. He would create an estate where his horses lived in luxury equal to any family residence, where his carriages received display worthy of fine art, where visitors would understand immediately that here was a man whose passion and wealth had produced something unprecedented. The decision required an architect capable of understanding such an unusual commission. Oliver needed someone who could make a stable elegant without pretending it was something else, someone who could work in the French styles he admired while accommodating practical requirements that no chateau in the Loire Valley had ever faced. There was only one choice. Richard Morris Hunt had already designed some of Newport's most impressive mansions. He understood both European architectural tradition and American ambition. If anyone could create a palace for horses, Hunt could. The partnership between Oliver Belmont and Richard Morris Hunt would produce one of the most peculiar buildings in American architectural history. A mansion where the horses occupied the ground floor and humans lived above them, where entertaining guests required acknowledging that thoroughbreds resided directly beneath the ballroom, where wealth expressed itself not through the traditional displays of art and furniture, but through the care lavished on animals. Newport had seen ambitious building projects before, but it had never seen anything quite like what Oliver Belmont intended to create. Chapter 2. Hunt's strangest commission. Richard Morris Hunt had designed mansions for the Vanderbilts, the Astors, and dozens of other wealthy families. He had created the base for the Statue of Liberty and the facade of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. His portfolio included some of the most important buildings in America. None of his previous commissions had prepared him for Oliver Belmont's request. Oliver wanted a Louis XIII-style hunting lodge, inspired by the French chateau he had visited during his European travels. He wanted limestone walls, slate roofs, and architectural details that evoked the aristocratic estates where French nobility had once kept their horses and hounds. This part Hunt understood perfectly. He had trained at the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. French architecture was his specialty. The complication came with Oliver's requirements for the interior. The entire ground floor, every square foot of it, would serve as stables and carriage storage. 30 horses would live there permanently, housed in stalls more luxurious than most Americans. Bedrooms. The carriages that those horses pulled would occupy an adjacent space, displayed like sculpture in a museum. Only the second and third floors would accommodate human occupants. Hunt had designed stables before. Every great estate needed them. But those stables were always separate buildings, positioned at respectful distances from the main house. You did not build a chateau on top of a barn. The smells, the sounds, the fundamental incompatibility of housing animals and entertaining society guests, all of it argued against Oliver's concept. Oliver would not be dissuaded. This was his vision. The horses were not an afterthought or a necessary accommodation. They were the point. He wanted visitors to understand from the moment they arrived that this estate existed primarily for his thoroughbreds. The human spaces would adapt to that priority, not the other way around. Hunt faced an architectural challenge unlike any in his career. He had to create a building that functioned as both stable and mansion. that looked elegant from the exterior while accommodating decidedly inelegant activities inside. That allowed carriages to enter through the front door and horses to live in heated comfort while guests danced overhead. The solution required careful engineering. Hunt designed massive ventilation systems to channel air through the stable areas and exhaust it away from living spaces. He specified drainage that would prevent any stable odors from rising to the second floor. He positioned the ballroom and formal entertaining spaces at the rear of the building, as far from the stables as the footprint allowed. The carriage entrance became a central feature. Hunt created a monumental arched opening tall enough to admit the largest vehicles. Carriages could roll directly into the building, where they would be unhitched and stored while the horses were led to their stalls. This eliminated the need for separate carriage houses and demonstrated Hunt's ability to make practical requirements architecturally impressive. For the stables themselves, Hunt employed materials and craftsmanship usually reserved for human spaces. Imported tiles covered the floors in patterns that rivaled ballroom designs. Hand-carved woodwork detailed each stall. The ceiling featured exposed beams in the French style, treating the stable area as seriously as any formal room in a traditional mansion. Climate control received particular attention. Each stall included steam heating, an innovation that few human residences possessed. The horses would never suffer through cold New England winters. Temperature regulation that would have seemed extravagant for servants' quarters became standard for Oliver's thoroughbreds. The building's footprint measured approximately 110 feet wide by 140 feet deep, creating roughly 50,000 square feet across 3 floors. The scale exceeded many Newport cottages that housed only humans. But Oliver intended to accommodate not just his family and guests, but 30 horses, dozens of carriages, and the staff required to maintain all of it. Above the stables, Hunt designed rooms that followed more conventional mansion patterns. The second floor would contain the primary entertaining spaces, the ballroom, dining room, and formal reception areas where Oliver would host society when he chose to do so. The third floor would house bedrooms for family and guests, positioned as far from the ground floor operations as possible. The exterior reflected Hunt's training in French classical architecture. Limestone walls rose in the restrained elegance of the Louis XIII style. Tall windows admitted light while maintaining the proportions Hunt had learned during his years in Paris. A slate roof completed the chateau appearance. From the street, Belcourt would look like any other grand Newport cottage, revealing nothing of the unusual activities occurring inside. Hunt selected a building site on Bellevue Avenue, Newport's most prestigious address. The Vanderbilts' marble house stood nearby. The Astors maintained properties within walking distance. Oliver would have neighbors who could not ignore his presence regardless of their feelings about his family background. Construction contracts went to established firms that Hunt trusted from previous commissions. The James Sinclair and Company would handle stonework, bringing the same expertise they had applied to other Newport mansions. Specialized contractors would install the heating systems, ventilation equipment, and other innovations that Oliver's design required. Cost estimates reached approximately $3 million, an extraordinary sum even by Newport standards. Adjusted for inflation, that investment exceeded $100 million in modern currency. Oliver did not hesitate. His inheritance could support the project. His obsession with horses justified any expense, and his determination to establish himself in Newport society demanded a statement that would command attention. Work began in 1891. The project would require 3 years to complete, employing hundreds of craftsmen and importing materials from France, Italy, and throughout the United States. What emerged would confuse and fascinate Newport in equal measure. A mansion that was also a stable that looked like a palace, an architectural expression of one man's peculiar vision, executed with the highest level of craftsmanship that late 19th century America could provide. Hunt would die in 1895, just after Belcourt's completion, having never designed anything quite like it before or after. His masterpiece, The Breakers, would open that same year for the Vanderbilts. But Belcourt would remain his strangest commission, the project that tested his ability to reconcile aristocratic elegance with decidedly inelegant functions. Oliver's dream was taking physical form, but dreams built in limestone require more than architecture to succeed. They require people willing to inhabit them, to make strange spaces feel like home, to convince society that unconventional arrangements deserve acceptance. Oliver would need a partner who understood how to navigate Newport's complex social currents while tolerating his equine obsession. He would find that partner in the most unlikely place, among the ruins of someone else's marriage. Chapter 3. The Divorcee. Alva Smith. Vanderbilt stood at the pinnacle of American society in 1892, and she had earned her position through intelligence, determination, and ruthless social strategy. Born in 1853 to a Southern family that lost everything in the Civil War, she had clawed her way from near poverty to absolute social dominance. Now, at the height of her power, she was about to throw it all away. Her marriage to William Kissam Vanderbilt had been a calculated arrangement from the start. The Vanderbilts possessed unlimited wealth from their railroad empire, but lacked the social acceptance that older families commanded. Alva brought social ambition and the will to force New York's elite to acknowledge the Vanderbilts as equals. Together they built Marble House, Newport's most expensive cottage. Together they conquered society through spending and strategy. But William had betrayed their partnership. He had taken a mistress, conducting the affair with indiscretion that humiliated Alva publicly. In an era when wealthy men's infidelities were routinely overlooked, Alva refused to tolerate such treatment. She had built her life on the principle that will and intelligence could overcome any obstacle. She would not accept defeat from her own husband. In 1895, Alva Vanderbilt did something that shocked American society to its foundations. She divorced William. Not quietly, not discreetly, but publicly, and with financial terms that left her independently wealthy. Divorce among the upper classes was virtually unheard of. It represented scandal, failure, and social death. Alva had just committed the unthinkable. The consequences arrived immediately. Doors that had opened eagerly now closed. Invitations ceased. Families that had courted her favor suddenly found reasons to be unavailable. Mrs. Astor, the ultimate arbiter of New York society, made her disapproval clear through silence. Alva had broken the rules, and the punishment was exile. Yet Alva was not destroyed. She possessed wealth, intelligence, and something more dangerous, experience in social warfare. She had forced her way into society once before. She could do it again, but she would need a strategy that acknowledged reality. She could not simply continue as she had been. She needed reinvention. Oliver Belmont offered that possibility. They had known each other for years through Newport's overlapping social circles. Oliver's bachelor status and unconventional priorities had kept him on the margins of society despite his wealth. Alva's divorce had pushed her to those same margins. Both occupied territory between acceptance and rejection, wealthy enough to matter, but compromised enough to remain vulnerable. Their courtship surprised no one who understood the practical calculations that governed society marriages. Alva needed respectability that marriage could restore. Oliver needed a partner who could manage the social dimensions of life that his horses could not. The match made sense, even if romance was not its foundation. They married on January 11, 1896, barely a year after Alva's divorce became final. Society reacted with mixed horror and fascination. Alva had married her ex-husband's friend. She had done so with defiant confidence rather than apologetic discretion. The wedding itself was modest by her standards, but the message was clear. Alva intended to continue commanding attention regardless of social opinion. Belcourt became their primary Newport residence. Alva moved from Marble House, which she would later reclaim through financial settlements, into Oliver's eccentric chateau. The transition must have been jarring. Marble House represented classical perfection, every detail executed to communicate wealth and refinement. Belcourt represented Oliver's obsession with horses, a building that prioritized animals over human comfort. Alva adapted with the pragmatism that had always characterized her approach to obstacles. She could not change the building's fundamental nature. The stables would remain on the ground floor. The horses would continue occupying space that other mansions devoted to human activities. But she could shape how society perceived the arrangement. She began hosting events that acknowledged Belcourt's unusual character while maintaining the standards she had always demanded. Guests arriving for dinners or balls would pass through the monumental carriage entrance, experience the scale of Oliver's horse palace, and then ascend to spaces where Alva's taste governed everything. The contrast became part of the experience, rather than something to hide. Oliver, for his part, seemed genuinely pleased to have a partner who understood society's mechanisms, even as she challenged its conventions. His horses remained his primary passion, but Alva's presence gave Belcourt a dimension it had lacked during his bachelor years. The mansion became not just a stable disguised as a chateau, but a functioning household where entertaining could occur despite the hoofbeats that echoed below. Their partnership extended beyond Newport summers. They maintained homes in New York and traveled together to Europe. Alva began developing interests that would eventually overshadow her social ambitions entirely. The women's suffrage movement had gained momentum, and Alva saw in it a cause worthy of her strategic intelligence and wealth. She could advocate for women's rights with the same determination she had once applied to conquering society. Oliver supported these interests more than most men of his era would have. He contributed financially to suffrage causes. He tolerated Alva's increasing involvement in political organizing. Their marriage became a partnership that worked precisely because both parties pursued separate passions while maintaining the public alliance that benefited them both. For 12 years, Belcourt functioned as intended. Oliver's horses lived in heated luxury. Alva managed the household and pursued her causes. Newport society gradually adjusted to their presence, unable to ignore two people who combined wealth, connections, and determination in equal measure. The scandal of Alva's divorce faded as new scandals claimed attention. The strangeness of Belcourt's design became familiar through repetition. But in 1908, everything would change in ways neither had anticipated. Oliver's robust health, which had never given cause for concern, would prove suddenly fragile, and Alva would face a decision about whether to continue inhabiting a house built around someone else's obsession. Chapter 4. Building the Horse Palace. Construction at Belcourt began in earnest during the spring of 1891. What materialized over the next 3 years challenged every craftsman who worked on it. They were building a stable. They were building a mansion. Somehow, impossibly, they were building both in the same structure. The foundation work alone required unusual engineering. Traditional stables occupied single-story buildings with minimal basements. Belcourt's design called for supporting 3 full floors, plus all the weight of limestone walls and slate roofing. The ground floor would bear not just structural loads, but also the constant traffic of horses being led in and out, carriages rolling across tile, and all the daily activities of a functioning stable. Hunt specified steel framing, a relatively modern technique that few residential buildings employed. The steel arrived from Pennsylvania foundries, each beam cut to exact specifications. Workers erected the skeleton that would support everything else, a hidden framework far stronger than masonry construction alone could provide. Limestone cladding transformed that steel skeleton into a French chateau. Blue Indiana limestone, quarried in the Midwest and shipped by rail, covered the exterior in blocks that masons cut and fitted with precision. The stone's warm color would glow golden in Newport's seaside light, identical to the material Hunt had specified for other prestigious commissions. The main entrance demanded special attention. Hunt designed an arched opening measuring nearly 20 feet tall, wide enough to admit the largest carriages Oliver owned. The surrounding stonework featured carved details, keystones, voussoirs, decorative moldings that announced this was no simple barn door, but a formal entrance to a significant building. Carriages would roll through these portals directly into the mansion's interior. Inside that entrance, craftsmen created what observers would eventually call one of America's finest carriage rooms. The space measured approximately 80 feet long and 40 feet wide, with ceilings soaring to 25 feet. Carriages would be stored here after use, arranged to display their craftsmanship, much as sculpture-filled museum galleries. The floor required materials that could withstand carriage wheels and horse hooves while looking elegant enough for a mansion interior. Craftsmen installed tiles in geometric patterns imported from Italy and France. Some tiles featured glazed surfaces in rich colors. Others provided texture for traction. Together, they created a floor that served both practical and aesthetic purposes. Adjacent to the carriage room, the stable proper housed 30 stalls arranged in rows. Each stall measured larger than most servants' quarters, providing space for horses to move comfortably. The flooring here used specialized tiles designed for drainage, channeling moisture away through carefully engineered plumbing systems. Individual stall details revealed the care Oliver demanded for his thoroughbreds. Hand-carved woodwork topped each stall door, different patterns distinguishing one from another. Brass fittings provided hardware that would resist corrosion from stable moisture while maintaining an elegant appearance. The horses' names would eventually appear on brass plates, announced as formally as family members in a portrait gallery. Steam heating throughout the stable area represented innovation that few human residences could claim. Pipes ran beneath the floors and along walls, radiating warmth that would keep temperatures comfortable year-round. The horses would never endure cold winters or struggle with dampness that could threaten their health. This climate control system alone cost more than many substantial homes. Ventilation required equal ingenuity. Hunt designed a system of intake vents along the base of exterior walls and exhaust vents in the ceiling. Natural convection would draw fresh air through the stable areas continuously, removing odors and moisture that would otherwise accumulate. Additional mechanical ventilation supplemented this natural flow, using steam-powered fans to force air exchange when needed. Above this horse palace, the second floor rose with the expectation of human occupancy. Here, Hunt returned to more conventional mansion design, though adapted to the unusual building beneath. The ballroom occupied the rear section, positioned as far from the stables as the footprint allowed. The space measured approximately 50 feet by 40 feet, with ceilings reaching 20 feet. Large windows overlooked the gardens, providing light and views while guests danced. Decorative elements throughout the ballroom demonstrated Hunt's ability to create elegance regardless of what existed below. Carved woodwork framed the windows and doors. Elaborate plaster cornices enriched the ceiling. Mirrors doubled the apparent space. When lit by chandeliers and filled with formally dressed guests, the ballroom could compete with any in Newport, despite the hoofbeats that occasionally echoed from below. The dining room adjoined the ballroom, sized to accommodate substantial dinner parties. Oak paneling covered the walls, creating warmth and acoustic dampening that formal entertaining required. A massive fireplace anchored one end, its carved stone mantel displaying medieval-inspired details. Oliver would eventually furnish this room with a table that could seat 24 guests, surrounded by Gothic revival chairs that reinforced the hunting lodge atmosphere he desired. Other second-floor spaces served various functions. A reception hall welcomed guests who had ascended from the grand staircase. Smaller parlors provided areas for conversation and cards. A library held Oliver's growing collection of books about horses, breeding, and racing. Each room received custom woodwork, decorative plaster, and finishes that maintained standards expected in Newport's finest cottages. The third floor contained bedrooms for family and guests. These were more modest than the entertaining spaces below, though still finished to high standards. Individual chambers featured different decorative schemes, allowing guests to choose atmospheres that suited their preferences. Bathrooms incorporated the latest plumbing technology, offering luxury that remained uncommon in private homes. Throughout construction, costs escalated beyond original estimates. Specialized materials required for the stable mansion combination cost more than standard residential building supplies. The climate control and ventilation systems demanded equipment that few contractors had experience installing. Craftsmen working with imported tiles and elaborate woodwork charged premium rates for skills that took years to develop. By the time completion approached in late 1894, total expenditure had reached approximately $3 million. Hunt's fee alone exceeded $100,000, reflecting the complexity of the commission. The investment placed Belcourt among Newport's most expensive cottages, exceeded only by the Vanderbilts' marble house, which had cost $11 million, including furnishings. Oliver commissioned additional elements that pushed costs higher still. He purchased carriages from the finest makers in America and Europe, each one a masterpiece of woodworking and upholstery. He ordered custom harnesses decorated with silver fittings. He installed display cases to showcase racing trophies and equestrian awards. The furnishings reflected his priorities as clearly as the architecture did. In the spring of 1894, Oliver moved his horses into their new quarters. 30 thoroughbreds took possession of stalls designed specifically for their comfort. Grooms settled into routines that would maintain the stable with standards that exceeded many show facilities. The carriages rolled into their display room, polished and ready for use. Belcourt had become operational. That summer, Oliver began inviting select guests to tour his creation. Reactions ranged from admiration to bewilderment. Society visitors had never seen anything quite like it. The craftsmanship was undeniable. The scale was impressive, but the fundamental strangeness, horses living in luxury that exceeded most humans' experience, a ballroom positioned directly above a stable, that oddity defied easy categorization. Some guests appreciated Oliver's commitment to his passion. Here was a man who had built exactly what he wanted without compromise. Others found the arrangement ridiculous, evidence that wealth without taste produced absurdity. Newport society divided in its assessment, unable to reach consensus about whether Belcourt represented visionary individualism or eccentric waste. Oliver did not care. He had achieved his goal. His horses lived in comfort that matched his ambitions. His carriages received display worthy of art. His summer residence announced to anyone who visited that Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont possessed the wealth and independence to pursue his obsessions without regard for conventional opinions. Belcourt stood complete, but its story had barely begun. The bachelor who built it would soon need a partner to help manage its complexities, and that partnership would transform Belcourt from a peculiar curiosity into something approaching a functioning household. Chapter 5. Death of a Dream. The morning of June 10, 1908, began unremarkably at Belcourt. Staff attended to their routines. Grooms fed and exercised the horses. The mansion maintained its usual rhythm of activity. Then, without warning, Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont collapsed. He had suffered a heart attack. At 50 years old, Oliver had shown no previous signs of cardiac trouble. His active lifestyle, riding daily, traveling frequently, managing his horses personally, had suggested robust health. Now suddenly, that strength proved illusory. Doctors arrived quickly but could do little beyond making him comfortable. Medical science in 1908 offered limited interventions for heart disease. Rest, quiet, and hope constituted the primary treatment. Alva stayed at his bedside while physicians conferred in hushed voices about possibilities and probabilities. For hours, Oliver lingered between consciousness and unconsciousness. When alert, he spoke with Alva about practical matters, business concerns, decisions that would need to be made, arrangements he wanted after his death. The conversations reflected the partnership their marriage had become. Whatever romance might or might not have existed between them, they had built something functional, and Oliver trusted Alva to manage what came next. By evening, his condition had deteriorated beyond recovery. Family members gathered. The Belmont brothers arrived from New York. Friends who could reach Newport in time paid final respects. In the rooms above the stable that had consumed so much of Oliver's attention, the man who loved horses more than society quietly died. News spread through Newport within hours. Society responded with the rituals expected for a man of Oliver's: wealth and standing, condolence calls, memorial tributes, formal acknowledgments of loss. Yet beneath the conventional expressions of sympathy ran an undercurrent of speculation. What would happen to Belcourt? Would Alva remain? Could she possibly continue operating a horse palace built around someone else's obsession? The funeral took place in New York, where the Belmont family maintained their primary social connections. Oliver was buried in Woodlawn Cemetery, joining his parents in the family plot. The service drew society figures who had known him for decades, though many attended more from obligation than genuine affection. Oliver had never inspired warmth. His horses had received the emotional investment he withheld from human relationships. Alva returned to Newport to confront practical questions that could no longer be delayed. Oliver's will left her substantial assets, including Belcourt, and a comfortable annual income. She could maintain the estate if she chose to do so. But did she want to? The mansion made sense for a man whose life centered on thoroughbreds. For Alva, whose interests increasingly focused on women's suffrage and political organizing, a 3-story horse palace represented a peculiar inheritance. She made her decision within weeks. The horses would be sold. Oliver's breeding operation would be dissolved. The elaborate stables that had defined Belcourt's purpose would be emptied. The ground floor that had housed 30 thoroughbreds would stand vacant, a monument to a passion that died with the man who felt it. The sale of Oliver's horses attracted buyers from across the country. His breeding program had produced quality animals that commanded respectable prices. One by one, the thoroughbreds departed. The stalls that had been designed specifically for their comfort stood empty. The heated floors, the custom ventilation, the imported tile, all of it remained, but the creatures it was meant to serve had gone. Alva kept Belcourt for several more years, using it occasionally during Newport summers while spending most of her time pursuing suffrage work in New York and Washington. She converted Oliver's library into a space for political organizing. The dining room that had hosted society dinners now welcomed suffragists planning demonstrations and lobbying campaigns. Belcourt became headquarters for causes Oliver would likely have found incomprehensible, but the building never truly functioned as Alva's home. Marble House, which she had reclaimed through legal settlements with William Vanderbilt, remained her Newport residence of choice. Belcourt was Oliver's creation, built to specifications she had merely tolerated. Without him, the mansion felt like exactly what it was, a stable with formal rooms added as an afterthought. During these years, Alva made modifications that reflected her priorities. She added a Chinese tea house on the grounds, a space for hosting suffrage meetings in more intimate settings. She updated interiors to reflect changing tastes, but she never addressed the fundamental strangeness of the building's design. The empty stables remained, waiting for a purpose that would never materialize under her ownership. In 1912, Alva did something that society found even more shocking than her divorce. She opened Marble House to host a suffrage rally. The Marble Palace that had represented the height of Gilded Age excess became a political venue where women demanded voting rights. The message was clear. Alva had moved beyond society concerns into activism that actually mattered. Belcourt played no role in these efforts. The building was too strange, too associated with Oliver, too impractical for the kind of work Alva now pursued. She maintained ownership but rarely visited. Staff kept the grounds passable and the building weatherproof, but the mansion entered a state of genteel neglect that would deepen over the decades ahead. When World War I ended, Alva was nearly 70 and ready to leave Newport entirely. She had conquered society, survived scandal, and built a new identity as a suffrage leader. Newport represented a past she had outgrown. In 1923, she quietly put Belcourt on the market. Finding a buyer proved nearly impossible. The building's unusual design repelled potential purchasers. Who wanted a mansion with 30,000 square feet of empty stables? What family would willingly entertain guests above spaces built for horses? The price dropped repeatedly without attracting serious interest. Alva finally sold Belcourt in 1925 to a couple who planned to use it as a summer residence. The sale price, though not publicly disclosed, was reportedly far below the building's original cost or even its value as real estate. Alva took the loss and moved on. She had already abandoned Newport emotionally. The financial details mattered less than the freedom to focus on causes she cared about. She would die in 1933, having never returned to Belcourt after the sale. The woman who had once ruled American society spent her final years advocating for women's rights, writing about political reform, and maintaining friendships with activists rather than socialites. Belcourt became a footnote in her biography, a strange interlude between two more significant chapters of her life. The mansion she left behind faced an uncertain future. Over the next 30 years, it would pass through multiple owners, none of whom could determine what to do with Oliver's horse palace. Each new buyer arrived with plans. Each eventually confronted the same problem. Belcourt was too strange to function as a normal residence, too specialized to convert easily to other uses, and too expensive to maintain for occasional visits. By the 1950s, the building stood largely empty. 30 years of deferred maintenance had taken their toll. The roof leaked in multiple places. Windows rattled loose in their frames. The decorative elements that craftsmen had installed with such care showed signs of deterioration. The magnificent stable tiles that had once gleamed now gathered dust in a space no longer serving its intended purpose. Newport's summer colony had largely dispersed. The great cottages that had defined the Gilded Age stood empty or had been demolished. Families who once competed to build the grandest estates now struggled with tax burdens and maintenance costs they could no longer sustain. Mansion after mansion met the wrecking ball, victims of changing economics and social structures. Belcourt seemed destined for the same fate. Who would save a building this strange? Who would invest in preserving a horse palace when horses no longer mattered to wealthy families? Who could possibly see potential in a mansion that even Alva Vanderbilt had abandoned? The answer would come from an unexpected direction, not from society people or wealthy collectors, but from a middle-class couple who saw in Belcourt's strangeness not a liability, but an opportunity. Chapter 6. The Tinney Miracle. Harold and Donald Tinney were not wealthy in the sense that Oliver Belmont or Alva Vanderbilt understood wealth. They were comfortable middle-class Rhode Islanders. Harold worked in business, Donald had taught school, who possessed something more valuable than money alone: vision and determination. In 1956, they heard that Belcourt was for sale. The mansion had stood largely vacant for years. Multiple owners had attempted to make something of it without success. The current owners wanted out, and they wanted out badly enough to consider offers that reflected reality rather than nostalgia. The Tinneys toured the property and saw what others had missed. Yes, the building was strange. Yes, the empty stables served no obvious purpose. Yes, decades of deferred maintenance had created problems throughout. But the bones were good. Hunt's architecture remained sound. The craftsmanship that had gone into construction still showed in details that had survived neglect. More importantly, they recognized an opportunity that no one else had considered. Belcourt could become a museum, not a house museum frozen in time, but a living space filled with art and antiques where visitors could experience how wealthy Americans had lived during the Gilded Age. The unusual layout, those vast empty stables on the ground floor, provided gallery space that normal mansions lacked. They made an offer. The exact purchase price remains somewhat unclear in historical records, with figures ranging from $22,500 to $61,600, depending on the source. What matters is that they acquired one of Newport's grandest chateaux for a fraction of what Oliver had spent to build it. The cost of a suburban house in 1956 bought them 50,000 square feet of Richard Morris Hunt architecture. Then the real work began. The Tinneys did not possess millions to pour into restoration. They would have to proceed slowly, room by room, repair by repair, funded by their own resources and whatever revenue they could generate by opening portions of the mansion to tourists. First came emergency stabilization. The roof received patches to stop active leaks. Broken windows were replaced or boarded. Plumbing and electrical systems were brought to minimally functional standards. None of this was glamorous, but all of it was necessary to prevent further deterioration while they developed longer-term plans. Simultaneously, they began acquiring furnishings. The Tinneys understood that an empty mansion, no matter how architecturally significant, would bore visitors. They needed objects, furniture, art, decorative items that could tell stories and create atmospheres worth experiencing. They started collecting with the modest resources they had available. European antique shops became their hunting grounds. They traveled repeatedly across the Atlantic, searching for pieces that great houses were selling as economies shifted and tastes changed. An Italian palace disposing of furniture, a French chateau liquidating contents, a Belgian monastery selling religious artifacts. The Tinneys bought carefully, focusing on quality over quantity. They looked for items with provenance, pieces that had belonged to royalty, nobility, or significant historical figures. A Gothic revival chair from an Austrian castle, a Renaissance table from an Italian palazzo, stained glass panels from demolished French churches. Each object brought its own story, adding layers of history to Belcourt's spaces. Some acquisitions came from surprising sources. They purchased items that had belonged to European royal families, including pieces connected to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. They found religious art from churches across the continent. They collected armor and weaponry that could fill Oliver's empty carriage room with displays of martial history. The ground floor transformation proved particularly dramatic. Those vast stable spaces, empty since Oliver's horses departed, became exhibition galleries. The Tinneys installed their armor collection there, dozens of suits representing different periods and styles, arranged as if knights were still inhabiting them. The effect was theatrical, unexpected, and oddly appropriate for a building this unusual. The carriage room received similar treatment. Rather than displaying Oliver's vehicles, which had long since been sold, the Tinneys filled it with coronation coaches, ceremonial carriages, and vehicles with royal connections. Visitors walking through Belcourt's front entrance now encountered not empty space, but treasures that told stories of European aristocracy. Upper floors required different approaches. The ballroom and formal entertaining spaces retained their architectural grandeur, but the tinnies furnished them with pieces that suggested how such rooms might have been used. Tapestries covered walls. Period furniture created seating arrangements. Decorative objects filled tables and mantels. The mansion began to feel inhabited, even though no one lived there permanently. They opened Belcourt to public tours as soon as portions were presentable. Revenue from admission fees funded additional restoration work and acquisitions. It was a gradual, self-sustaining process. Each improvement attracted more visitors. More visitors generated more income. More income enabled more improvements. The tinnies also pursued another revenue stream that would become increasingly important: private events. The ballroom could host weddings. The grounds accommodated receptions. Belcourt became not just a museum, but a functioning event space, generating income while introducing new audiences to the mansion's unusual charms. But supernatural stories began circulating almost immediately. Staff reported unexplained phenomena: footsteps in empty rooms, objects moving without apparent cause, temperature drops in specific areas. Visitors claimed to see figures in period dress who vanished when approached. The tinnies neither encouraged nor discouraged these tales, understanding that ghost stories attracted a certain clientele, even if skeptics dismissed them. One particularly persistent legend involved a chair. Multiple visitors reported feeling compelled to leave a specific chair in the ballroom moments after sitting in it, as if an invisible occupant wanted them to move. The tinnies eventually roped it off after too many people asked about the haunted chair with uncomfortable seriousness. Whether one believed in ghosts or not, the stories reflected something genuine about Belcourt's atmosphere. The building did feel different from other Newport mansions. The combination of its unusual design, its decades of emptiness, and its eclectic furnishings created an environment that sparked imagination. Visitors wanted to believe something supernatural inhabited these spaces. Over the decades, the tinnies poured their lives into Belcourt. They continued acquiring pieces well into their later years: a 13th-century stained glass window, a Belgian chasuble worn during royal masses, furniture that had graced European palaces. The collection grew to include thousands of objects, each one carefully selected and placed. Harold died in 1999, having spent 43 years transforming Oliver's horse palace into a museum that attracted visitors from around the world. Donald continued the work alone until his own death in 2006, 50 years after they had purchased the mansion. Their partnership had saved Belcourt when demolition seemed inevitable, but their deaths left a question: what would happen to the collection and the mansion they had spent lifetimes building? Neither had children to inherit their life's work. The estate would need new stewardship, someone willing to continue what the tinnies had begun. That transition would bring changes the tinnies could not have predicted. The mansion they saved would pass into yet another phase of its long, strange existence. Chapter 7: Modern Revival. After Donald Tinney's death, Belcourt faced an uncertain transition. The mansion and its contents went up for sale as the estate settled. Preservation advocates worried that the collection the tinnies had assembled over 50 years might be dispersed, the objects sold individually to collectors around the world. Worse, the building itself might finally meet the demolition that had seemed inevitable before 1956. The sale attracted various interested parties. Developers examined the property with eyes toward luxury condominiums. Historical societies considered options for institutional ownership. Individual buyers with preservation intentions explored whether they could manage such an enormous undertaking. In 2009, a couple named Harley and Alex McSweeney purchased Belcourt. They were not wealthy philanthropists with unlimited resources. They were preservationists with experience in historical restoration, who recognized what the tinnies had created. They committed to continuing Belcourt as a museum while addressing deferred maintenance that had accumulated even under the tinnies' devoted stewardship. The McSweeneys faced immediate challenges. Decades of museum operation had taken a toll on the building systems. The roof that the tinnies had patched multiple times needed complete replacement. Plumbing and electrical systems required comprehensive upgrades. Windows that had been repaired repeatedly now needed restoration or replacement. The list of necessary work was extensive and expensive. They prioritized structural integrity over cosmetic improvements. A new roof came first, 80,000 square feet of slate replacing deteriorated materials that could no longer protect the interior. The project took months and cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, but it secured the building against water damage that had threatened collections below. Windows received systematic attention. Each frame was examined. Damaged sections repaired or replicated, glass restored where possible or replaced where necessary. The work proceeded slowly, limited by available funds and the need to maintain public operations that generated revenue. Interior restoration followed similar principles. Rather than attempting comprehensive renewal all at once, the McSweeneys worked room by room, addressing the most urgent needs first. Plaster that had cracked and separated from walls received repairs. Woodwork damaged by moisture was restored. Floors that had borne decades of tourist traffic were refinished. They also confronted decisions about the Tinney collection. Some pieces the Tinneys had acquired were genuine treasures with significant historical value. Others were of more questionable provenance or condition. The McSweeneys began the slow process of cataloging everything, researching origins, and determining what should remain and what might be sold to fund restoration work. Belcourt's role as an event venue expanded under the new ownership. The ballroom hosted an increasing number of weddings, the grounds accommodated corporate events, and the unusual atmosphere of the mansion attracted parties seeking something beyond standard hotel ballrooms. This revenue stream became crucial to funding ongoing preservation efforts. The ghost story tourism that had developed under the Tinneys continued. Multiple television shows featuring paranormal investigations filmed episodes at Belcourt. These programs introduced the mansion to audiences who might never have heard of Newport's architectural history but were deeply interested in haunted locations. The publicity attracted visitors even if the supernatural claims remained unverifiable. Yet serious architectural recognition came as well. In 2012, Belcourt was added to the National Register of Historic Places, official acknowledgement of its significance to American architectural history. The designation provided no direct financial benefit, but confirmed what preservationists had long argued. Richard Morris Hunt's Strangest commission deserved protection and study. Academic interest increased as scholars recognized Belcourt's unique position in Gilded Age architecture. Here was a Hunt design that broke from conventional mansion formulas, a building that reflected its owner's personality in ways that politely refined estates never captured. A physical manifestation of the era's more eccentric expressions of wealth and individualism. The McSweeneys welcomed researchers, providing access to architectural details and historical records that helped document Belcourt's construction and evolution. Their cooperation with scholars produced articles and conference presentations that spread knowledge about this peculiar Newport landmark. In 2017, after 8 years of ownership and restoration efforts, the McSweeneys put Belcourt on the market. They had accomplished substantial work. The roof was secure, major systems had been upgraded, the collection had been organized. But the scale of remaining needs exceeded what they could sustain. The asking price was $3.6 million, reflecting both the property's historical significance and the reality that maintaining it would require substantial ongoing investment. The sale attracted Alex and Annie founder Carolyn Raphael, though that potential purchase ultimately fell through. The mansion remained with the McSweeneys, who continued preservation efforts while seeking sustainable long-term solutions. Throughout these transitions, Belcourt remained open to visitors. Tours continued on schedules that adapted to the resources available. The ballroom stayed available for events. The peculiar mix of Hunt architecture, Tinney acquisitions, and accumulated history continued attracting people curious about Newport's most unusual mansion. Today, Belcourt occupies a complicated position in Newport's preservation landscape. It is not a house museum in the traditional sense. No attempt is made to restore it to Oliver Belmont's era or freeze it at a particular historical moment. It is not a purely commercial venue. The architectural significance and historical collection prevent treating it as merely a rental property. It exists somewhere between these categories, adapting to survive while retaining enough character to remain meaningful. The building that once housed Oliver's horses now welcomes curious visitors through those same stable doors. The carriage room that Hunt designed for Oliver's vehicles displays armor and ceremonial coaches. The ballroom where Alva entertained hosts' 21st century weddings. The spaces continue evolving, serving purposes their original creators never imagined. This adaptability, This willingness to become something new rather than disappear may be Belcourt's most important lesson. The mansion survived not by preserving Oliver's original vision intact, but by accepting transformation. The Tinneys saved it by seeing opportunity in its strangeness. The McSweeneys continued that work by prioritizing preservation over perfection. Each generation of owners has found ways to keep the building alive by allowing it to change. Belcourt's future remains uncertain in the way all private preservation efforts face uncertainty. No endowment protects it. No institution guarantees its maintenance. It depends on individuals willing to invest resources in sustaining something strange and difficult, something that resists easy categorization or conventional use. Yet it endures. Hunt's architecture stands above Bellevue Avenue, as it has for 130 years. The limestone walls still glow golden in Newport light. The spaces still demonstrate what one man's obsession with horses could produce when combined with unlimited resources and talented architects. And visitors still climb those stairs from the stable areas to formal rooms above, experiencing the peculiar disjunction that defines this most unusual of Newport cottages. Chapter 8. Lessons from the Horse Palace. Walk through Belcourt today and you experience something that no other Newport mansion offers. The Breakers impresses with its scale and grandeur. Marble House overwhelms with classical perfection. Rosecliff charms with its elegance. Belcourt confuses, and that confusion tells truths about wealth, architecture, and preservation that more conventional estates cannot communicate. Oliver Belmont built exactly what he wanted, without compromise. Most Gilded Age mansions reflected negotiations between builders' desires and architects' expertise, between personal preferences and social expectations. Oliver dismissed such compromises. He wanted a palace for his horses, and he built one regardless of how strange others found the concept. This uncompromising individualism produced a building that has never functioned smoothly for conventional purposes. Alva Vanderbilt, one of the most capable society managers America has ever seen, could not make Belcourt work as a residence after Oliver died. The fundamental mismatch between the building's design and normal human needs defeated even her formidable will. Subsequent owners faced the same problem. Each new purchaser arrived with plans to convert Belcourt into something more practical. A conventional mansion, perhaps, or offices or apartments. Each eventually confronted the reality that the building resists such transformations. You cannot easily erase 30,000 square feet of stable space. You cannot pretend those enormous ground floor chambers were designed for anything but horses and carriages. The Tinneys succeeded where others failed precisely because they accepted Belcourt's strangeness rather than fighting it. They did not try to make the mansion something it was not. They embraced the unusual layout and filled it with collections that matched the building's eccentric character. A conventional museum would seem wrong in such unconventional spaces. The Tinney collection, armor, royal carriages, religious artifacts, European furniture, fits because it acknowledges that Belcourt was never meant to be ordinary. This raises questions about preservation philosophy that extend beyond one Newport mansion. What do we save, and why? Traditional preservation focuses on protecting buildings that represent the best of their period, the most beautiful, the most significant, the most representative examples of architectural achievement. Belcourt challenges this framework. It is not beautiful in conventional senses. Its significance lies partly in its strangeness. It represents not the norm, but the exception. Yet Belcourt deserves preservation precisely because it is strange. American architectural history needs buildings that reveal the eccentricities of their creators, not just monuments to refined taste. We need evidence that wealth produced oddities as well as masterpieces, that personal obsessions sometimes overrode social conventions, that not everyone who could afford Richard Morris Hunt wanted the same graceful chateau that others commissioned. The building also demonstrates how preservation happens in practice rather than theory. Academic preservationists often envision comprehensive restoration funded by generous endowments or government support. The Tinneys prove that preservation can also mean gradual accumulation, buying what you can afford, repairing what most urgently needs attention, generating revenue through creative uses, and accepting that perfect restoration may never be achievable or even desirable. Their approach has critics. Purists argue that filling Belcourt with European antiques obscures the building's original American character, that visitors experience a fabricated atmosphere rather than authentic historical spaces, that the Tinney collection, however impressive individually, creates confusion about what Belcourt actually was. These criticisms have merit. No one visiting Belcourt today sees Oliver Belmont's horse palace as he experienced it. The horses are gone. Oliver's original furnishings have long since dispersed. The spaces have been repurposed multiple times. What visitors encounter is a palimpsest, layers of different eras and purposes visible simultaneously. But this palimpsest may be more honest than freeze-dried authenticity. Belcourt's history is not the story of construction and use frozen at a single moment. It is the story of construction, abandonment, rescue, transformation, and adaptation. The Tinney additions are part of that history, not a betrayal of it. They represent one era's effort to save what previous eras had rejected. The supernatural tourism that Belcourt attracts presents similar complexity. Ghost stories are not history in academic senses, yet they reflect something genuine about how buildings acquire meaning beyond their physical facts. Belcourt feels haunted not because spirits walk its halls, but because its history is haunted by unfulfilled purposes, by Oliver's premature death, by Alva's abandonment, by decades of neglect. Visitors who come seeking ghosts often leave having learned about the Gilded Age, Richard Morris Hunt, and the preservation challenges facing historic buildings. If ghost stories serve as gateways to architectural history for audiences who might otherwise never care, perhaps that marketing serves preservation purposes even if it troubles purists. Belcourt's economic model also offers lessons. The mansion survives through mixed uses that generate revenue while maintaining public access. Event rentals fund preservation work. Admission fees support operations. This hybrid approach, part museum, part venue, part tourist attraction, may be the only sustainable model for privately owned historic buildings without institutional backing. Contrast this with Newport's house museums operated by the Preservation Society. Those mansions receive professional curatorial care, comprehensive restoration, and programs designed by historians. They also charge premium admission prices and operate with restrictions that limit how visitors experience the spaces. Both approaches have value. Neither is universally correct. What Belcourt proves is that buildings this large and specialized cannot survive as private residences in the 21st century. Operating costs, maintenance requirements, and property taxes exceed what even wealthy individuals can sustain without turning their homes into businesses. The era that produced such mansions is gone. The social structures that made them functional have dissolved. Preservation requires acknowledging this reality rather than lamenting it. Belcourt survives because multiple owners have been willing to adapt its uses rather than insisting it remain frozen as a single-family residence. This adaptability, this acceptance of change, may be the most important preservation strategy available for large historic buildings. Oliver Belmont could not have imagined tourists walking through his stable in search of ghosts. Alva Vanderbilt would likely find it absurd that the ballroom she abandoned now hosts weddings for people she never would have acknowledged socially. The Tinneys created a museum unlike any they had visited in Europe. The McSweeneys continue work that will never be finished, yet the building stands. Hunt's architecture endures. Visitors continue discovering Newport's strangest mansion and leave understanding a little more about how Americans expressed wealth during the Gilded Age, how architecture can embody personality in peculiar ways, and how preservation happens through improvisation rather than perfection. Belcourt survived not because it was the most beautiful or the most important Newport cottage. It survived because people saw possibility in its strangeness, because they were willing to work with its oddities rather than against them, and because they understood that saving something imperfect is better than losing something irreplaceable. Chapter 9. The strange legacy stand on Bellevue Avenue today, and look at Belcourt's limestone facade. Hunt's French chateau rises above the street exactly as it did when Oliver first brought his horses through those massive doors. The architecture has endured 130 years, with relatively little alteration, but everything the building means has changed completely. Oliver built Belcourt to house his passion. His 30 thoroughbreds justified 50,000 square feet of specialized construction. The horses were the point. Human occupancy was negotiated around equine priority. This inverted logic, animals first, people second, made perfect sense to Oliver and seemed utterly bizarre to nearly everyone else. That strangeness defined Belcourt from the beginning. Other Newport cottages might be criticized as ostentatious or excessive, but they remained comprehensible. The Breakers was large, but it was clearly a house. Marble House cost a fortune, but its purpose was obvious. Belcourt confused basic categories. Was it a stable or a mansion? The architecture said mansion. The ground floor said stable. The combination satisfied no conventional expectations. Alva discovered this incompatibility immediately. She could manage the social challenges of remarrying after divorce. She could navigate the complex hierarchies of Newport society. But she could not make Belcourt function as a home after Oliver died. The building worked only for someone whose life centered on horses. Remove that foundation, and the whole structure became problematic. Her abandonment carried symbolic weight beyond the practical difficulties. Alva Vanderbilt Belmont was not someone who retreated from challenges. She had forced New York society to accept the Vanderbilts. She had divorced William and survived the scandal. She had built a second career as a suffrage leader after society rejected her. Yet Belcourt defeated her. She walked away because continuing to inhabit such a space made no sense without Oliver's horses to justify it. The decades that followed, multiple owners, various schemes, eventual emptiness, demonstrated that Belcourt's strangeness was not a temporary problem that clever people could solve. The building resisted easy categorization or conventional use because Oliver had designed it to be unconventional. That individualism, that refusal to compromise, had produced something that could not adapt to normal purposes. The Tinneys succeeded by embracing this reality rather than fighting it. They did not try to make Belcourt normal. They accepted that it was strange and filled it with contents that matched that strangeness. Their collection of armor, coronation coaches, and royal furnishings fit because they acknowledged that conventional museum exhibits would seem wrong in such unconventional spaces. Their work raises interesting questions about authenticity and preservation. Nothing in Belcourt today recreates Oliver's original use. The horses are gone. The carriages are different. The furnishings are European rather than American. Visitors experience something that Oliver never saw and that bears limited resemblance to how he actually lived. Yet the Tinney transformation may capture something essential about Oliver's spirit that pure restoration could not. He built Belcourt to display his obsessions without regard for convention. The Tinneys filled it with their obsessions in the same spirit. The specific objects differ, but the underlying impulse, to create something personal rather than broadly acceptable, connects across the decades. This suggests that preserving character may matter more than preserving specific uses. Belcourt's character is eccentricity. Its meaning derives from its refusal to conform to standard mansion patterns. The Tinney additions honor that character even as they alter the spaces. A conventionally restored Belcourt, frozen at 1895 and displaying period-appropriate furnishings, might be more academically correct, but less true to the building's essential nature. The supernatural tourism that developed under the Tinneys adds another layer to this question of meaning and authenticity. Ghost stories are not history, but they reflect how buildings acquire emotional resonance beyond their physical facts. Belcourt feels different from other Newport mansions because its history is different, marked by obsession, abandonment, transformation, and uncertainty. Visitors who arrive seeking ghosts often leave having learned about the Gilded Age, Richard Morris Hunt, and the complexities of historic preservation. If belief in the supernatural serves as a gateway to architectural history, perhaps that marketing strategy succeeds even if scholars dismiss it. The goal is to keep people interested in the building, to generate revenue that funds preservation, and to maintain public engagement that justifies continued effort. Modern Newport treats Belcourt as one mansion, among many rather than the anomaly it actually is. Tourist literature groups it with the Breakers, Marble House, and Rosecliff as examples of Gilded. Age, excess. But Belcourt deserves separate consideration. It represents something different. Not the best of an era, but the strangest. Not refined taste, but personal obsession. Not what wealthy Americans wanted to show society, but what one wealthy American wanted for himself regardless of what society thought. This distinction matters for understanding the Gilded Age more honestly. The era produced masterpieces like the Breakers that demonstrated how European architectural traditions could be adapted for American wealth. But it also produced oddities like Belcourt that revealed the eccentricities that extreme wealth could enable. Both types of buildings deserve study. Both tell truths about their time. Belcourt's future remains uncertain in ways that more conventional mansions avoid. The Breakers will always be significant as a Vanderbilt commission and a Hunt masterpiece. Marble House will always represent Alva Vanderbilt's social ambitions. These buildings have secure places in architectural history, regardless of their physical condition. Belcourt's significance is more fragile. It matters because it is strange. If that strangeness becomes too difficult to maintain, if the building gets converted to uses that erase its peculiar character, then what made it worth preserving disappears, even if the architecture remains. The challenge is sustaining oddity, protecting eccentricity, keeping alive a building that resists the categories through which we usually understand historic preservation. The fact that this challenge has been met for 130 years, through Oliver's brief occupancy, Alva's management, decades of abandonment, the Tinney rescue, and subsequent stewardship, suggests that Belcourt possesses resilience that its strangeness might not predict. Buildings that serve clear purposes often disappear when those purposes become obsolete. Belcourt never served clear purposes. That ambiguity may be its protection. Oliver's Horse Palace has become a museum, an event venue, a tourist attraction, and a preservation case study. It has been all of these things because it could not easily be any single thing. The same refusal to fit categories that made it problematic as a residence makes it flexible as a survivor. Adaptability achieved through oddity rather than design. Stand in the ballroom today and you can still sense what Oliver created. The scale, the materials, the craftsmanship all testify to the resources he commanded and the seriousness with which he pursued his vision. The hoofbeats that once echoed from below are silent now, but the building remembers. In its unconventional layout, its oversized stable areas, its entire improbable existence, Belcourt remains what Oliver intended, a palace built for horses by a man who loved them more than social acceptance. That story of obsession, eccentricity, abandonment, and unlikely survival deserves telling. Not because Belcourt is beautiful in conventional senses or important in traditional categories, but because it reveals truths about wealth, personality, and architecture that more refined estates can never communicate. Sometimes the strangest buildings teach the most interesting lessons. Chapter 10. The Palace that Refused to Die. Today, if you walk down Bellevue Avenue in Newport, Belcourt Castle still stands exactly where Oliver Belmont built it, 130 years ago. The limestone glows golden in the afternoon sun. The massive carriage entrance still dominates the facade. From the street, it looks like any other Gilded Age chateau, revealing nothing of the strangeness within. But step inside, and you enter a space unlike any other Newport mansion. The ground floor, those 30,000 square feet that Oliver designed for his horses, now holds medieval armor, coronation coaches, and European treasures that span centuries. The ballroom, where guests once danced above the stables, hosts modern weddings. The dining room, where Oliver and Alva entertained welcomes tour groups curious about lives they can barely imagine. Belcourt functions today as museum, event venue, and architectural curiosity. It generates revenue through multiple streams: admission fees, wedding rentals, private events, and the occasional ghost tour that capitalizes on its reputation for supernatural activity. This hybrid model keeps the building operational while maintaining some public access. It is not perfect preservation, but it is survival. The current owners face challenges that Oliver never anticipated and that the Tinneys could not fully solve. Climate control systems designed for horses require constant adaptation for human comfort and artifact preservation. Roof maintenance on 80,000 square feet of slate demands resources that admission fees alone cannot provide. The building consumes money at rates that would horrify even Gilded Age millionaires accustomed to extravagant spending. Yet Belcourt persists. Each generation of owners has found ways to keep it alive by accepting what it is, rather than insisting it become something else. Oliver built a horse palace. The Tinneys made it a museum. Modern stewards balance preservation with pragmatic uses that generate necessary income. The building survives through adaptation, not rigidity. Compare this to other Newport mansions. The Breakers, owned by the Preservation Society of Newport County, operates as a pristine house museum with professional staff and substantial endowment support. Marble House receives similar institutional care. These buildings face fewer existential threats because organizations rather than individuals bear responsibility for their maintenance. Belcourt has no such safety net. It depends on private owners willing to shoulder burdens that institutions would struggle to manage. This vulnerability makes its survival more remarkable. The building has persisted for 130 years, not because preservation was easy or obvious, but because individuals kept choosing to invest in something strange and difficult. What does Belcourt's survival prove? That buildings can outlive their original purposes if they find new ones. That strangeness, while complicating preservation, can also protect against the obsolescence that doomed more conventional estates. That adaptation matters more than authenticity when the alternative is demolition. Oliver's vision, a palace for horses, lasted exactly as long as Oliver lived to maintain it, 5 years. That original purpose proved unsustainable the moment its creator died. But the building endured because it could be reimagined. Alva tried and failed. Multiple owners attempted various schemes. The Tinneys succeeded by accepting the building's oddity rather than fighting it. This is Belcourt's lesson for historic preservation. Sometimes saving a building means letting it change. The purest approach, restore everything to original conditions, freeze it at a single moment, works for institutional museums with adequate funding. Private preservation often requires messier compromises, mixed uses, commercial rentals, tourist attractions that serious historians might dismiss, whatever keeps the doors open and the roof intact. Critics will always argue that such compromises betray the buildings they claim to save, that filling Oliver's stable with European armor distorts his intentions, that hosting modern weddings in spaces built for Gilded Age society perverts their meaning. These criticisms have merit, but they must be weighed against the alternative. Another Newport mansion demolished, another Richard Morris Hunt design erased, another piece of architectural history converted to rubble. The Tinneys understood this calculus when they purchased Belcourt for a fraction of its construction cost. They could not restore it to pristine 1894 condition. They lacked the resources for such perfection. So they did what they could, stabilized the structure, filled it with interesting objects, opened it to visitors, and kept it alive for 50 years through constant effort and modest means. Their work was not academically pure, but it was real preservation accomplished by people without institutional support or unlimited funds. They proved that ordinary individuals with vision and determination can save extraordinary buildings that institutions ignore or abandon. Belcourt's future remains uncertain. No endowment protects it. No organization guarantees its maintenance. It will continue requiring owners willing to accept its challenges along with its charms. The next generation of stewards will face decisions about how to balance preservation with practical necessity, how to maintain architectural integrity while adapting to modern uses, how to keep a horse palace alive in a world where horses no longer justify such buildings. But if the past predicts the future, Belcourt will endure. It has survived Oliver's death, Alva's abandonment, decades of neglect, multiple ownership changes, and constant financial pressure. The building refuses to die because people keep seeing possibility in its strangeness. Stand in that massive first-floor space today, the former stable that now holds medieval armor, and you can feel the layers of history. Oliver's horses once lived here in heated luxury. Empty decades followed when no one knew what to do with such a space. The Tinneys transformed it into galleries that made the strange useful. Each era left marks, created meaning, added purpose. This is not the preservation that textbooks describe. It is messier, more pragmatic, more accepting of change. But it is preservation nonetheless. The building stands, the architecture endures. Visitors experience spaces that Oliver created and that Richard Morris Hunt designed. The specific contents and uses have evolved, but the essential strangeness, that quality that made Belcourt remarkable from the beginning, remains intact. Oliver Hazard Perry Belmont built a palace for horses because he loved horses more than social acceptance. That single-minded obsession produced a building so strange that even Alva Vanderbilt, who had conquered American society through sheer force of will, could not make it work after he died. The mansion should have been demolished. Most people expected it would be. But Belcourt survived. Not because preservation was inevitable or easy, but because individuals across generations kept choosing to invest in something difficult and strange. Their collective efforts, Oliver's original vision, the Tinny's rescue, modern stewards' continued work, created a legacy that transcends any single purpose or era. The Horse Palace endures, strange, impractical, impossible to categorize, and absolutely irreplaceable. Just as Oliver intended, though not in ways he could have imagined. Belcourt's greatest achievement may be this: it proved that buildings built for impossible purposes can survive by accepting transformation. That strangeness, properly embraced, becomes strength. That the most unusual mansions sometimes teach the most important lessons about adaptation, survival, and the surprising resilience of stone and vision combined. Thank you for exploring Belcourt Mansion with me. If you found this investigation into Newport's strangest estate fascinating, please like this video and subscribe for more architectural deep dives. Tell me in the comments which mansion we should investigate next: the Elms, Château-sur-Mer, Kingscote, or perhaps another forgotten palace with secrets waiting to be discovered. These detailed documentaries are possible because of your support. Until next time, keep looking at old buildings with curious eyes. They have more stories to tell than you might imagine.